Hello and welcome to the Lookout Virtual Industry Talk. My name's Ben. I'm the Creative Pathways producer at Lookout. Today we're joined by Rick Watts. Hello, Rick, if you can come and join us.
Hey, Ben.
Hello, how are you doing?
I'm good, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Good, nice to see you. So Lookout is an arts organisation that's based in Brighton and Hove that connects young people, artists and businesses through creativity. And through the virtual industry talks, which are a series of online talks which we deliver in partnership with GB Met, you'll get to hear from creative industry professionals like Rick about what their jobs are and the pathways they took to get there. So today we're joined by Rick, who I won't say too much about him. I'll let him do all the talking. But he's an independent producer based in Manchester. So let's get started, I guess. So can you tell us a bit about your job and kind of how you would describe what you do and describe yourself?
Sure, of course. So I am a theatre producer. I'm at the moment an independent theatre producer. And horrifyingly, next year marks 20 years that I've been doing it, which feels like quite a milestone to have kind of done one thing for kind of 2 decades. But throughout those 20 years, I've done it in lots of different ways. And I guess, for anyone who doesn't know what a theatre producer is, it's a pretty important and fundamental role in the theatre industry. It comes in lots of different shapes and sizes, but I think there's some kind of really core fundamental things at the heart of it. The way I see it is somebody who works really closely with artists. So often artists are the people making the arts, whether that's a director stood in front of a room full of actors, or a project might start with a writer, a playwright who sits down and writes a script, and that's the kind of start of the creative process. Or it might be a big collaborative project where you get a group of artists together in a room and they all devise a project. However that art's made, it starts with artists. But to support artists to make that work, to kind of create the opportunity for them to be able to kind of make a show and put it on, there's a huge amount of other work that needs to happen. And a lot of that is either done by or kind of driven by a producer. And so you're talking about anything from like initial development of an idea, kind of interrogating an idea. What's this idea for this show? Is it any good? Do we think there's legs in this? To figuring out, is it possible to do? When might we do it? So I always think, there's those really kind of basic things of like, what is it? When's it going to happen? Where's it going to happen? Who's going to make it happen? How are we going to make it happen? And how much is it going to cost to make happen? So it's kind of really basic questions that all need answering before you can even dream of getting a show on a stage, for instance. And the producer's often kind of driving that. So like I said, it might be about developing the idea. It might be then figuring out actually how this show would come into being. Like, this is a really big, ambitious idea. It clearly needs a lot of money, a lot of people, a lot of time, or it's a really easy idea. It only needs a couple of people and we can do that quite cheaply. So you're kind of scoping out a project, developing a budget, working out, the kind of personnel you'd need, where you're going to do it, who's going to come and see it, all of those kind of things. Making kind of decisions on those things, setting them up, and then managing that process. It's really a kind of management role. You kind of create that opportunity. You make sure there is a budget and there is money there to pay people. You make sure there is a team. Theatre is a big collaborative art form that needs lots of people to kind of come together to make something happen with lots of different specialisms and skills. You might have a lighting designer and a costume maker and a carpenter and some electricians and obviously actors, and you might have musicians. Like, where do you find all those people? Often, again, it's a producer who's kind of driving that. So who are all the people, getting them all to the room? Where's it going to happen? Where is the show going to be rehearsed? And what is the theatre or number of theatres that the show is going to be put on in? And how are they secured? And what are those financial deals? And then how is all of that stuff underpinned by contracts and good working practices, and make sure everyone's really looked after and can be the best artists that they can. So it's a really broad role. You know, sometimes you're head down in a Excel spreadsheet, sometimes you're writing contracts, but other times you're sat in a rehearsal room kind of watching extraordinary things happen, or you're out and about watching shows, getting ideas for good projects, or seeing if there might be a project you want to pick up and develop, or kind of join forces with. Sometimes you're doing lots of mentoring or kind of looking after staff members, being a bit of a shoulder to cry on to kind of people who are struggling. And other times you have to be the boss who goes in and kind of whips people into shape if something's going, you have to kind of be everyone's friend, everyone's therapist, you're their boss, you're their kind of banker, you're kind of paying them. It's a really broad role, and it's like I said, it's different in different contexts. But I think those fundamental things, whether you are someone like Cameron McIntosh, he's a big producer. If anyone's ever heard of a producer, it's usually Cameron McIntosh, who's the kind of producer behind, stuff like Les Mis, the kind of big, like, kind of genre-defining shows that are still running decades later. Or you might be running a tiny theatre company that's just you and a couple of mates trying to get a show on above a pub in a fringe festival. You're still largely going through that same process. There's a little kernel of an idea here, but to actually turn that into a show with people on the stage and people in an audience watching it, there's just all of those different elements that all need to be thought through, put in place, looked after, delivered, kind of. And it's a producer who's often driving that, sometimes doing all of that work themselves if it's a kind of really small team, or if it's a bigger team, at least kind of overseeing all that and then managing a kind of bigger team of people to kind of fulfill all those different roles.
I think that's really interesting, that thing of, the idea of it be that person being like the driving force, and I think you like really clearly sort of said all the different elements of like what that means of like driving something forward, I'm interested to know as well, like, how did you end up kind of getting where you are now? Like, how did you end up doing what you do now, basically?
Yeah, my route into it actually is kind of a bit dull, which is weird for a producer, because a lot of producers or people who kind of call themselves producers end up producing a bit by accident. So a lot of like my colleagues or peers who do what I do, have been actors, or they've been stage managers, or they've worked in marketing or fundraising for theatres, and they've ended up getting up to produce, or they've got a bit closer to that kind of producing process and have ended up, their careers have kind of gone on kind of quite evolving paths. Whereas I was quite young when I kind of went, right, I want to be a producer. I was at university. I've always loved theatre and drama in lots of different kind of guises, performing since I was a little kid in different shows. So it was always something that was kind of at my heart. But when I got to university, I kind of realised, I think I thought I'd always maybe be an actor or a performer. And I got to university and realised I really wasn't very good at it. Or, outside of the safe little bubble of my like school or college or the little like local dramatic society I was in, when I was in this kind of suddenly a university with people from all around the country who were really talented, but also like really ambitious, I don't think I quite had the talent or the tenacity to keep putting myself up for auditions, getting rejected, really kind of fighting for your place. I was like, actually, I don't think that is what I want to do, but I still love theatre and I want to see if I can find a way of making a career for myself in this. So I just tried lots of different things. I directed a show as a student. I didn't really like that. I didn't like kind of standing up in that room and all the actors looking at me, expecting me to have all the answers for how to put that. That didn't seem right. I did some stage management, which is kind of a backstage role, where you're looking after, props and the scenery and after the actors as well backstage. But I found it a little, for me, a little kind of reactive. You didn't really have much say in what was going on. You had a clearly defined job and you were just responding to the things that needed to happen. And then a friend who I was at university with wanted to take a play to the Edinburgh Festival, and I'd never been to the Edinburgh Festival, but it sounded fun. It sounded like the kind of place you'd want to go and spend your summer, and had been told he needed a producer for his show. So asked me, do you want to be my producer? And I was like, I have no idea what that really means. And together we figured out, you know, it probably meant I'd have to help us find a venue for the show. And we probably need to raise a little bit of money. We weren't, you know, we were doing it as a student production, so we weren't paying ourselves, but there was still some costs. We had to sleep somewhere in Edinburgh and get ourselves there and, you know, spend a little bit of money on a set and get some flyers printed. And, you know, so there was definitely some work there to do. We needed some marketing and some publicity and tried to get the press in, you know, so there was clearly a little job list of stuff to do that looked a bit sporadic because it kind of covered all bases, but apparently that's what happened in this one role. And I just said, yeah, I'd give it a go. And I loved it. I loved that little journey of being sat in a pub and a mate, but, you know, who is an artist now, but, you know, I'd absolutely kind of seen him as a mate. Just going, I've got this great idea for this thing. And I was getting excited about that and going, oh, I can see that. I love that play. It was a production of Sarah Kane's Crave, and it was only like it was the first ever amateur production of it. They licensed it that long after it was originally made, but it's such an amazing play. We both loved it. And my friend just had this vision for how he wanted to do it, and we could really see it. We could imagine the venue we wanted it in. And I got really excited by that. And then taking that on that little journey to go, well, you know, he had the idea of like how to make it, but didn't know how to actually get to Edinburgh Fringe and didn't know how to particularly make that happen. Figuring that out together and going on that bit of journey and then being sat there in a damp, smelly cave that was like this place I'd ever been at the time, watching a kind of sellout audience with 4-star reviews for this show, just kind of going, wow, I don't know what this is or this has been, but it's really exciting. And there's something really intoxicating here. And I don't know, it seemed to kind of pull out a bunch of skills I had for kind of being pretty good with numbers, being pretty good with like problem solving and planning. And it kind of pulled on some of those strengths. And I could see that I'd made a real difference. And it was this brilliant idea. And I'd have never had the real idea. I wouldn't have known how to make the actual show. But without me, he couldn't have actually got that show. He could have made that show in a rehearsal room, but would never have got it where it was. And that little thing about like, oh, if we join our forces and I can bring my skills to this, look what we can make happen together. There's something in this. This is exciting. And I just went, right, I'm going to be a producer. So I went and found a master's degree at Central School of Speech and Drama in London in creative producing. Did that for a year. Over the summer, when I was supposed to write my dissertation, I just used the last of the horribly large loan I got to keep me living in London, which put me in debt for about a decade afterwards, but to kind of go do some work experience. So I rocked up at Battersea Arts Centre to do 2 weeks worth of work experience and finish that 4 months later, having just stuck around because I loved it and they kept giving me more and more responsibility. And then it led to my first job. And suddenly I was on this kind of career path, which, like I said, has not lasted nearly 20 years because I just got the opportunity to try it out in that kind of quite safe environment of being a student. It just seemed to click that I was good at it. And it gave me the closeness to theatre. I felt proactive. I felt like I was helping make something happen, but using my skills rather than trying to be a performer or director, which I think just clearly didn't have the flair for. So
yeah, and I think that like often you hear, I think that's really amazing to hear that actually like fairly early on through this like moments of experimentation and trying stuff out that you like quickly realise, oh, actually this is like my shtick, you know, this is my thing. And I think that's, yeah, like you often hear with theatre producers, I think actually more you hear from the producer rather than the artist, but that kind of relationship between the producer and the artist being like so important because you're both like offering something to and like collaborating with each other to make that thing happen. And what it feels like you still like work with a lot of venues and with artists. So are there any like particular projects that you're working on at the moment or like projects that you're excited about?
Yeah, so I mean at the moment I've worked in lots of different contexts. I've spent a big chunk of my career working independently, kind of directly with artists and kind of co-running small theatre companies with them really, because I don't know, there was something I found really exciting about that the very closeness of that relationship and working with one artist or, you know, a couple of different artists, but working with them over a really long period of time, kind of going in 10 years time, this is where we want to be. Let's spend that big chunk of time trying to get there. think of all the shows we can make. You know, by this date, we want to have shows on at this. You know, so I spent a big chunk of time doing that. And then when I kind of hit my mid-30s, I was kind of ready for a new challenge. So I came and worked for a big theatre here in Manchester, the Royal Exchange, which was a whole new different context of suddenly, you know, spending 15 years kind of knocking on people's doors going, hello, can we come in? Can we make a show here? You know, suddenly having responsibility for this big theatre and being able to go out and ask artists to come in and make work and have staff and budgets and resources and a beautiful theatre at your disposal to make to kind of make things happen was just really exciting. Obviously, for lots of people in this industry, COVID had a really difficult impact. You know, obviously, people know that theatres closed for you know the best part of a year, and then this last not quite a year, I don't know, 8-9 months. Lots of them have been reopening, but it's been slow. It's been hard. Audiences have come back, but not always in the numbers that they would have. There's, you know, cancellation after cancellation. So it's kind of been a bit tricky time. And the theatre I used to work for had to make about 70% of its staff redundant, which was, pretty rough. But I've been, I guess, figuring out what I want to do next. So I've kind of decided I'm freelance again and independent. But I really enjoyed working in that big venue and kind of having that resource. So I'm currently focusing on kind of developing that experience. I'm working for 2 different theatres at the moment, both as a freelancer, a couple of days a week each, and quite different roles. So I'm working for a theatre here in Manchester called Contact Theatre, which is essentially Manchester's theatre for young people. So it kind of focuses on 13 up to about 30, pretty generous definition of young people, but like, and it does a huge amount of participation. So it has an amazing young company. It has amazing we've got our own music studio and all these courses for kind of music and sound design and engineering. It has kind of writers group. It does all these kind of social enterprise projects out in the city, but also does a huge amount for kind of young first generation artists, so people making their first shows, young companies setting up. So it's a big kind of incubator of kind of young talent, but also has a focus on young audiences too. And my role specifically there is about the kind of public facing program. So we do a couple of seasons a year, about 3 months each, over 2 spaces. We've got a 300-seat theatre and a little studio. And my job at the moment for Contact is to figure out what shows we're going to put on, which artists do we want to kind of profile and platform, through the lens of what do we think is going to be interesting to a young audience, like what work, what shows have something to say that are relevant to the lives of young people in the city. What work, you know, who are the exciting young artists, but who's going to excite a kind of young audience too. A really big focus on representation and diversity. Manchester's a really kind of diverse city in lots of ways. And so we've got lots of big commitments around working with artists of colour, of queer artists, LGBTQ artists, of disabled artists, to ensure that both we're giving the widest breadth of people the opportunity in the theatre, but also that anyone from Manchester could walk into that theatre and see themselves reflected in the programme. So often our industry is has a bit of tokenistic representation, but it's very dominated by a kind of white, able-bodied, straight culture. And of course, there's always room for that, but that little bit of work kind of just readdressing that balance and kind of making sure that you're kind of lifting up a really broad range of voices, different experiences. So I spent about half my week at Contact program. So I'm specifically programming our autumn season at the moment. We're just about to start work with a new artistic director. So this is the last season of work under the old artistic director. And so that's involving me going to see shows and watching lots of shows on videos, and I'm just trying to put together a collection of work that I think makes sense, that is varied enough that, would appeal to a really wide range of audiences, but is also coherent enough that it looks like an interesting package of work rather than just disparate random collection of whatever I found. And then the other half of my time, I'm working for a theatre in North Wales called Theatr Clwyd. It's the largest producing theatre in Wales. It's a brilliant theatre with a really rich kind of 45-year history. It's just closed the majority of its doors at the moment for a big 2-year kind of capital rebuild. The building's been there since the 70s and is kind of falling down. So they've a kind of £44 million big capital project to kind of create a shiny new theatre, which is exciting. And in this interim period, they just needed a bit of extra producing support. So they brought me in to develop a couple of shows, kind of 6 shows in total, but the 2 I'm working on at the moment are 2 new plays by Welsh writers that we've commissioned specifically for 2 young Welsh directors who've been on a traineeship at the theatre. Both of them former actors who turned to directing, won this funded kind of 18-month traineeship at the theatre where they've been assistant directors and been in and out of rehearsal rooms, but also just hanging out at the theatre to find out how it works. And the end of their program, their time there, is the chance to direct a show. And so we've commissioned these 2 plays for them, and I'm working with them as a producer. It's really their kind of biggest, not quite professional debuts because they've all done some kind of smaller stuff, but it's kind of their first big solo shows that they've directed for a major theatre. And so I'm just kind of guiding them through that process, building their creative teams with them, helping them find their cast, and take through that process. And the first one of those starts rehearsing in a couple of weeks. And they're really exciting and brilliant artists. They're kind of really rewarding, kind of using the experience I've gained to kind of help them take a pretty big step for themselves.
Yeah, that's cool. That's really great. I mean, I think that thing around like being sort of an independent producer, but like associated with a big venue that has a lot of like, you know, venues that have resource, and you know, I think it's like the perfect mix, isn't it? Because you know, you're kind of like an independent person in there doing your thing, but you're also privy to all of that stuff that you get, basically.
It's definitely working out at the moment. It's definitely been a nice sweet spot to have kind of discovered, I think. A nice, good, you know. So.
Yeah, that's cool. And you spoke a bit about it before, about like, you know, kind of being interested in the arts from when you were young, like thinking about, you know, when sort of doing acting. But is there anything else sort of like in your childhood or for you as a young person that like impacted your choices on wanting to work in the arts, and maybe specifically within theatre?
I think I was a really shy kid. I'm still a bit shy now. Like, if I've got a reason to talk to someone, I'm fine. But like, you know, have a natural shyness. And I think just finding drama and theatre as a kid just was like my little salvation. It's such a kind of cliche thing to say. I think I was really lucky that my grandparents on my mum's side, my grandma was a singer and my granddad was a scientist, but directed shows for the local amateur dramatic society and took that very seriously. And so kind of growing up, there was always, you know, we got taken to the theatre and my grandma sang, and it was just, you know, it was in the air. It was something that, you know, lots of kids grow up and it's absolutely not a part of kind of traditions of what their families do. It feels like quite another thing, but it was always a little bit present. And just like, starting to do school plays and stuff, suddenly finding a space where I suddenly didn't feel shy, like, you know, really weird, like, you know, not wanting to speak up in class or kind of being quite quiet in the playground, but stick me on a stage and suddenly you couldn't shut me up, and just that little kind of confidence boost. And I think, you know, anyone who's kind of performed, you know, whether actors, musicians, dancers, whatever, like know that thrill of being on stage, the buzz, the kind of doing something that very immediate kind of I guess response from an audience. It gives you a real kind of a real high and a real buzz, and I found that quite addictive. So it just kind of it embedded in me that was kind of a fun thing to do, and it wasn't my only interest, but it remained a core interest. And then as I kept going through the various stages of my education and kept making choices about what to do, I was always looking at a range of potential things, but there was just something about it that just kept pulling me in that direction. I think just because of how much I loved it. And, you know, there were many times it's like, well, you could do the sensible thing or you could do the thing you love and you think might make you happy. And was, lucky enough to be in a position that my kind of family always supported me. So they go, yeah, that's fine. Do the thing you love. Which, is definitely a privilege, but...
yeah. Well, I think also producing is an interesting thing, isn't it? Because I would say, like, naturally, I'm an introvert. I like being with people, and I like like socializing and working collaboratively. But also, I find it. I don't always get my energy from being with lots of people, and I think that kind of like producer role. My experience on that, anyway, is that you're like involved in these like really exciting, dynamic, like artistic spaces, but you haven't got to be the one that is like on that stage. You can just sort of like blend into the background a bit and sort of allow that like naturally extroverted people to kind of do their thing. So I think it's like quite a happy medium, isn't it?
Yeah, I really agree. Like, I feel really fortunate that I've got a lot of, colleagues, and a lot of those colleagues have become friends who I just think are the most brilliant people. They're funny and they're charming and they're amazing performers and they can tell brilliant stories and they have important things to say about the world. And I'm in awe of them, you know what I mean? Like and yet I recognize that there are little gaps in their knowledge or in their confidences or things that they wouldn't know quite how to harness all that brilliance they've got, or they can harness it, but they don't know how to kind of get it out to the world. And there's definitely something about kind of going, well, actually, I can meet you there. If I can bring the stuff I've got to our relationship, I can kind of help lift you up and help like you share what you're kind of here to do. I can create that platform for you. I can help connect you with audiences, and then just stand back in the shadows, not in the spotlight, but watch that and enjoy that, and see people thrive, and see an audience kind of meet them, meet their words, meet their stories, meet their images, or whatever it is, and see how much that excites or enriches an audience too. And just knowing you've played that bit of role in that, without having to be that person yourself. I don't know, it's definitely a little sweet spot that kind of satisfies the kind of creativity and the love of theatre, but kind of the older I got, the less I wanted to be in that spotlight. Like I said, when I was really young, I loved it, and then I definitely kind of withdrew from that.
Sure.
So it's a nice place to be that kind of suits my personality, but still allows me to do the thing I really value and the thing I really love.
Yeah. I mean, what I've definitely got from like chatting to you is, it's like connecting, it's the connection with people, isn't it? And like working with lots of people. And I think, we always talk loads about like a network and like kind of building a network. But I'm interested to hear sort of like your experience of doing that, like how did you sort of like build your network, and what were your experiences of that?
I'm really crap at networking. Like, again, that shyness I've talked about really doesn't help. Like, if I have a reason, if someone introduces me and does that thing of like, so-and-so meet Rick, here's 3 interesting facts about each other, and I've got a little something to go on, okay. If I've got a real reason, if I'm in professional mode and I have to go and speak to that person about this, fine. But that thing that like in the bar or at networking events when you're just going up and it feels like you're cold calling, you're like, you might as well be working in a call center, just like making those kind of those kind of unprompted introductions to try and kind of schmooze someone or get them on board. So it's just never been my comfort zone. I'll do it if I'm pushed. I think the thing I've always valued is about rather than trying to have the most impressive address book anyone can ever have and like millions of very tenuous connections and relationships, has always been about investing in like a slightly smaller number of but more meaningful relationships. Like, it being fine for relationships to be slow burn, like really trying to look after people in relationships. A big part of producing for me is kind of being quite nurturing and looking after people, the act of making shows, putting on a production, writing a play, is really hard and stressful and it's quite vulnerable. You know, you put yourself in a vulnerable position, kind of go, hello world, here's what I think, or here's my talent, judge me, or whatever that is. You know, it's quite a vulnerable thing. And so a big part of producing for me is that a pastoral care thing of like looking after people. But that actually then ends up allowing you to build really good relationships with people. And so I have a lot of like long-term, really kind of deep, meaningful relationships, but that haven't been gone there because I've been working a room with my business card and doing that. But it's actually just over time allowing relationships to kind of mature and evolve. And, you know, and then that leads to you hopefully getting a pretty good reputation. So then people kind of approach you and you can, again, that makes it a little bit easier if you're approached rather than you having to go on knocking on the doors. So, you know, when I'm around people I'm comfortable with, I'm, you know, as chatty as anyone, but it's just that, yeah, shyness isn't necessarily a really obvious attribute for your producer. So finding your way around that and making that work. And for me, it's always been about prioritizing having a small number of really meaningful relationships than
I think that's
party. And, you know, and some people really value that and, you know, love you know, being seen to be with all of the right people and, you know, great. But I've always just like been happy to like follow my own little path and just like meet the people I want to meet and make some great work together.
Yeah. I think it's good to hear that, you know, from that kind of perspective of like doing kind of networking in with a little n, you know. It's like I think we always think of networking as just this like being in these huge rooms with tons of people and doing that schmoozy thing, you know. But actually, I think that's probably echoes a bit like my experiences of just like, you know, having my people that like we work really well together and that I also want to work with and vice versa, and then just kind of nurturing that. And I think that isn't something that's like often spoken about, you know. I think we live in a time of like it's all about quantity, isn't it? It's like how many followers you've got, how many, you know, blah blah blah. But you know, that's not always the way, is it?
Although on that, I must admit, actually, one of the things that I found most useful is social media. Like, I use Twitter and Instagram a lot. I know, like, Twitter is less used by younger people these days. You know, it's very much a particular. I'm definitely in that kind of Twitter generation, but I do use Insta a lot too. But I started my Twitter account, I don't know, 12, 13 years ago. And it started as a very kind of professional thing. I just talked about theatre and I talked about the work I was doing. And then I think it just got to a point, you know, when it's probably even a bit before Brexit, but in that kind of rise towards Brexit, that kind of mid-10s, 2010s, just finding the world a bit of a hard place. I think I just started using it a bit more sillily, and you know, I'd use it to post shit memes or talk about reality TV or post pictures of my dog or my friends, and I started kind of making real life mates from it. And I think I just started using it in a much more flippant way, but without really remembering that I still had loads of like quite influential theatre people, like artist directors of major buildings or major theatre critics or whatever, following me. And then every so often, like someone really senior would like a tweet, and I'd be like, "Oh God." And I was a bit mortified. But actually, then really quickly it turned around to in those big networking rooms, where because they do exist sometimes, actually being really useful because so many people do use Twitter to kind of present this like constant professional face and look how well I'm doing, and it becomes this very competitive thing. But actually, I think just being a bit of a dick on the internet kind of humanizes you a bit. And so I'd have people coming up to me at network meetings again that I probably wouldn't have dared going up to, but like feeling they knew me a little bit because of the silly stuff I'd shared online or whatever. And it was a real like digital icebreaker in a way that then enabled conversations to start. So actually I vowed, I'm just going to keep just being me. And if anyone thinks I'm ridiculous, they know where the unfollow button is. But so many people just parrot corporate lines or only use those social media accounts just to like promote their next show, and it's like that constant hustle. And I think that just gets tiring. Like I think actually letting people see a little bit of who you are and what your values are, but also kind of what you get up to when you're not at work, weirdly helps in some of those work relationships because it means people just see you as a person and it's easier to kind of forge those relationships.
And I guess we're sort of doing that a bit, we've been forced to do that in COVID, haven't we? We've all been, I mean, I'm talking from my spare room, which below the camera is disaster. But, it's, I think, kind of, having that insight into people's lives, it gives, I guess that it goes back to that thing of what you're talking about, of like having a reason to want to talk to somebody. And that can just be like, your dog is dead cute, So I guess it's that kind of thing as well. Interesting.
Absolutely.
So down to the nitty gritty now. So like, how do you earn a living from what you do? Like, who pays you?
Yeah. So at the moment, let's say these two things I'm working for, I've kind of got ongoing freelance contracts with both, on a day rate. So, and it's because I've got 20 years of experience, and in both cases, I'm kind of going in to fill a gap. Both organisations in big periods of change. So Contact had only just reopened its building after a 4-year capital development project. Well, it was a 2.5 year that got extended because of COVID, and they're about to change artistic director. Clwyd just closed the building. So they're organisations in flux who needed a bit of extra support. And because of that, and then the experience I brought, I kind of get paid a pretty nice day rate from them. I know I've got kind of guaranteed work with Contact till September and Clwyd until November. So it's a couple of days a week each, and I kind of balance them. And if one gets a bit busier, I'm able to kind of manage the kind of flow between them. And each month I stick in an invoice for the number of days I've worked. And so that's I'm in a nice place with that. The 4 years before COVID, I was at the Royal Exchange, and that was my first ever proper big salary, where I had like a full-time job with a grown-up salary, and I got paid at the same time at the end of the month, which was brilliant. For the 15 years before that, I won't lie, it was really up and down. Like, I think the commitment to being the independent producer, like there were times when I was younger when maybe I could or even should have gone and got a job in a venue, gone and played, like got an assistant producer or somewhere, been a smaller cog in a big machine. And I think I was a bit stubborn. I was just like, now I'm really enjoying this thing of like going, I love this small group of artists I'm working with. I want to just keep making their work happen. But the only way we paid ourselves then was setting up projects, going on fundraising, sticking Arts Council bids in, hoping they'd be successful, doing 6 months worth of work to set up a tour, writing the funding bid, keeping a tour kind of alive while you wait to see if you get the funding decision, and then it doesn't come and you have to cancel it and you never get paid for that work. But hopefully that's okay because you've been paid from this other project you're balancing here. And, it was 15 years of juggling, and sometimes it worked really well and other times it was pretty disastrous. Like, I started in London and I moved back to Manchester where I am now because I just couldn't afford London rent. Just trying to, there was a choice there. If you're going to stay in London, you need to give up this very particular line of work you're doing and go and get a well-paid job somewhere. Or you could move back north where it's a lot cheaper and you've got a bit of a support network and keep pursuing this. And that, the stubborn bit of me decided that's what I wanted to do. But yeah, it was pretty tough, but I'm really glad I kind of managed to stick through it because it meant I've then been able to kind of build up that experience, which has then levered in this kind of later part of my career, actually for the industry, a pretty decent salary, and now earning a pretty decent freelance living, which occasionally I feel guilty about because I'll often be working with like much younger artists who are earning a lot less, but I also have been those people for a long time, and definitely feel I've earned my dues enough to finally be able to pay my mortgage or go and buy coffee if I want one, yeah.
Great. That's great. Thanks for that. Yeah, I think we've kind of spoken about some of this stuff, but maybe we can roll some of this into one. So what would you say is like the thing that you enjoy sort of most about what you do? And what are some of the like important traits that you think a kind of a producer working in theatre sort of needs to like harness as much as possible?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think that for the stuff that kind of I enjoy most, I think is probably also linked to some of the traits in that first and foremost, I think you have to have a passion for what you do. I think you can't be a producer and just phone it in. Like, it is hard work. The hours can be crazy. You have to, like I mentioned early on, you know, it starts with that kind of sense of drive. Like, if you don't have that drive, that determination to go, I want to make this happen, no one else is going to. In fact, everyone else on that project is looking for you to continue pushing something forward. So it has to start with passion. So, like, the things that get me passionate, but they can be different for different people. But like I said, it is that, you know, it goes right back to that first Edinburgh Fringe show, is about an artist getting really excited about an idea and going, I can help make this happen for you. Like that, just being able to kind of make that offer and then be a bit of like an architect of a process, or, you know, create the kind of route through which they can make that show, I find thrilling. I love sitting on a show. Usually, you know, the first couple of performances can always be a bit hairy, and press night, when you kind of expose a show to the world and the critics and it all gets reviewed, is never very fun, because you're watching it through the eyes of a bunch of people who are judging it, and you're really hoping it goes well. So I never loved that bit. But then that bit after it, once the show's opened, the creative team, the director and the designers have all left, and it's just left, and then the actors and the stage managers just turning up every day and running a show, sneaking in the back and sitting in an audience on a show that you're really proud of, and watching audiences just love what you've made. Like, it's such a thrill. We did a production of The Producers, the kind of old comedy about a theatre producer and a kind of scheme to get rich by producing the biggest flop on Broadway, and then it all goes horribly wrong. We did that as our Christmas show at the Royal Exchange in 2018, and it was the most joyous show I've ever worked on. It was great, but just, I've never had an audience react like it. And I saw that my own show, I don't know, 20 times, which I don't think I've ever done. I just kept going back to see it, either taking friends, different family members, or I'd just be in the theatre on a matinee day and just block out my diary for 2 hours, just go and sit and watch it. I love watching the cast perform, but just watching an audience loving what you do, I don't know, I know that you kind of help make that happen, is really exciting. But on a similar thing, it isn't just about them having a good time. There's also something about artists who are saying something about the world, who are telling stories that need to be heard, artists who are kind of, in their own little ways, kind of changing the world. You know, if you have a room full of people and even a couple of them leave just slightly thinking differently about a particular issue, or going, I never knew that, or I'm going to think differently about kindness, or whatever it might be, just taking out a little. And I can think of all kinds of shows from my past that have just had these little moments that have just slightly shifted how I see the world, or that I still come to me in certain situations now, and kind of knowing you're creating work that is just in its own little gentle way changing the world. I find really, inspiring. So I'd say they're the kind of things that drive me. Like, there's a lot of hard work, there's a lot of boring work in producing, there's a lot of admin, there's a lot of spreadsheets, there's, you know, which is fine. It's really important and essential, but that's not what gets you up. It's those kind of moments I've just talked about that really get you doing it, and they're the tools that kind of allow you to kind of get to those good moments, those really kind of satisfying moments. For every producer, it might be different. The answer to that might be different, but I think it still boils down to there has to be something that you're excited by, that you have a passion for. I think you have to be prepared to be pretty tenacious. You know, people will say no to you. Like, nothing gets handed on a plate, I don't think. You know, even now at this point, you know, I will work with an artist and develop an idea for a show that I think is amazing, and go to venues or go to a funder and still get no's. You know, it's not right for us, it doesn't fit this thing, we've got something else a bit similar to that, we've prioritized giving our funding to this other project for the, you know, whatever that would be. You have to kind of be prepared to keep going, you know, learn from the no's, learn from the mistakes, but not let it kind of set you back. Be prepared to work hard, but there's a lot of payoff, like amazing relationships, incredible. You know, I've got to travel, you know, I've taken shows to America and around Europe and to Australia, and yeah, I've met some of the most incredible people and had some hilarious times and made shows that I'm so proud of and will kind of carry with me somewhere in here for like the rest of my time. But that's underpinned by a lot of graft and a lot of hard work and a lot of late nights, and it's definitely not a 9 to 5 switch off as you leave the office kind of job. Your mobile is on, you're always checking your emails because, well, shows are happening all evening, rehearsals happening in the day. Like there's very few points you can switch off. I've been on sun lounges by a pool on holiday, taking urgent calls or doing my emails, because it's really hard to not. And for me, I think like the last other, this definitely doesn't apply to all people in this industry, definitely doesn't apply to all producers, but for me it's a really important thing, which is about integrity. Like I've only worked on shows that I really believe in. Like I have to love the artist or believe in the message of the show or the story it's telling or the importance of it. If I wanted to just do something for the money, for a quick cash in, because I think, there'll be an audience for that'll get me rich or something. There's so easier ways of getting rich than trying to produce theatre. Like the skill set you need to produce theatre, you could apply that in so many other contexts in different industries and be paid better for it, for that to be kind of less risk, or so for me, like that sense of integrity and therefore reputation, like people know that if I'm working on a show, I hope that it's worth looking at. It's worth considering. I'm not just peddling them any old crap. They can trust me. They can trust I'm going to have like a good ethical set of principles behind what I do, that decisions have been made for the right reasons. Like for me, that's just really important. Like something I've always tried to cling to. So yeah, I think that's pretty important.
Yeah, great. And final one is, do you have any like survival tips and tricks? Like if there's anything that like, what's the take home message, I guess, from this chat that we've been having that you'd like people to kind of move on with?
It's a good question, that frame like that.
Or what do you wish that you'd sort of known when you were at college that you know now?
I think for me, like one thing that I really wish, because I think it really held me back a lot in my 20s, in like the first, I don't know, 7 or 8 years of my career, is that everyone in this industry kind of follows their own path, and that's all right. Like spending a lot of time and energy comparing yourself to other people is really useless. Like again, social media doesn't help, but everyone presents the most successful version of themselves, or a lot of people do. Some people are very candid about their flaws, but like people still present heavily curated versions of themselves in the world, whether that's at network meetings, in rehearsal rooms, around a board table, on Twitter or Instagram or TikTok. People are always putting a bit of themselves forward. The truth is always kind of more complex. Even people you look at going, oh, wow, they're doing really well. Oh, look how quickly their career is rising. Look, they've got this opportunity. Why didn't I get that opportunity? There's always so much other stuff going on for those people that you don't see. And there are probably people who are thinking the same about you, but you can't really relate. You never think about that. You're always kind of, I find myself comparing myself kind of negatively to other people, or like being jealous of opportunities other people get. And I think just with age and with experience, kind of really recognizing that it's just really not healthy or helpful. Like the most important thing is to kind of find a path for yourself through this industry, whatever it is you want to do in this industry, that feels good and true. I think a lot of actors, for instance, spend a lot of their time doing this, looking at friends who book gigs or booked adverts, and this constant, and it's really hard, and it's a negative energy that can consume a lot of your time and energy that you could be just putting into like yourself or making stuff happen for yourself. So yeah, trying to find that little path that's like authentic. You might not be rising the ranks as quickly as other people, or you might not be getting as well paid gigs or as big gigs or as someone else, but like keep focused on what you want to do, remind yourself why you do it, why it's important, and just take your kind of your own measures of success and your own measures of kind of like joy and pleasure from what you're doing because you believe in what you're doing and it's authentic to you and it's where you are and who you are, than looking around the industry and going, oh, I wish I was doing what they're doing, or why, because I just think there's so much of it, like every emerging artist scheme, every commission thing. We've got so many award ceremonies and playwriting prizes, and so many of these things can do really good things. But, you know, even the way, you know, cast lists are displayed on shows, you know, with the most famous people at the top, and like there's hierarchy in the industry, there's so much pressure to succeed that I think it can be really stifling at times. And I think and I definitely spent my 20s going, I started off in a kind of, my first job, I was quite young for it. So people were like, oh, wow, look at you. You're already doing this at only 23. And I was a bit like, watch other people start to overtake and kind of go, should I stop working with these artists and go and try and get a job that will look more impressive on my CV? Is that the game we're playing here? And ultimately, some people found that kind of courage to go, no, actually, you love doing what you're doing here. You're really committed to these artists. Keep doing what you're doing. And I'm so glad I did, because I don't know, I could just look back at what I've done with such kind of pride on the whole. And it's got me into a kind of really good, stable place in my career where I've now got a pretty, you know, I got made redundant, and quite quickly a couple of different theatres all came and went, can we pay you a decent day rate to come and help, you know, because I've managed to build a bit of reputation, and I've got a nice work-life balance that I've managed to achieve over years of trying to practice that, and it's all worked out all right. And I'm not running the National Theatre, I'm not the most famous producer in all of the land, but I've got to spend almost the last 20 years doing what I love and making a career from it, making some brilliant relationships along the way. And like, there are so many people in the world who can't say that. But yeah, I think just kind of find the thing that you love, that you're passionate about, and find your kind of authentic way through it, rather than putting crazy pressure on yourself to be the best of the best, or the youngest, or the brightest, or the quickest, or the most acclaimed, or, you know, because I think it can just drive you mad a bit, and not be very helpful.
Oh, that is great. That is a nice way to end it, I reckon. That's really cool. Thank you so much. Oh no, that was great. That was really cool. You know, basically, like, you've got to forge your own path, haven't you? You've got to kind of, you know, do it your way and sort of hold on to like why are you doing what you're doing, you know. And I think that's a really important. That's a good take-home message in my view. I think that's a good one. That's really cool. Thank you for spending this hour with me, just having a little natter. If people watching the recording, if they want to like follow you or see what you're up to, how do they do that?
Twitter's probably best. So I'm at Rick Watts, so RICWATTS, on Twitter. Or I'm always happy, you know, again, from kind of, you know, students or people looking for bits of advice on how to get into the industry or whatever. I'm always happy to kind of get emails. So my email is rickwatts, so RICWATTS @me.com.
Great.
Always happy to hear from anyone if I can be.
Cool. Thank you so much. And for Lookout, you can see us on our website, which is projectlookout.org, and we're on all the social media, so you can follow us and see what we're up to there. Well, thank you so much. Take care and enjoy your evening.
You too. All right.
Okay. Bye.